The town square was already thick with heat and whispers when she stumbled across its boards, her shawl slipping from her shoulders, her face pale beneath the harsh sun. Children pointed, women muttered behind gloved hands, and men smirked openly as if her very presence were a crime. "She has no kin," someone jeered. "No dowry, no name worth carrying." Another voice cut sharper. "Not even a husband would claim her." Her throat tightened, her hands clutching at the worn edges of her shawl, wishing it could hide her from their eyes. But no cloth could cover the sting of their laughter. And then the crowd fell strangely quiet. From the far edge of the square, the Apache chief walked forward, his braids glinting with beads, his eyes dark as storm clouds, his stride slow but sure. The jeers died on tongues, curiosity replacing mockery as he stopped before her. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then he did the unthinkable. He bowed his head low before her, his broad shoulders bent in solemn respect. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. What's he doing? Has he lost his mind? But it did not end there. Behind him, like a tide rolling in, 200 Apache warriors moved as one, kneeling upon the dirt, their faces grave, their silence louder than thunder. The sight struck the square like a blow. 200 proud men lowering themselves before the woman they had scorned. Elias Redfeather. I have carried this memory across years, for in all my wandering I never saw pride humbled so swiftly as that day, when jeers were drowned by the silence of men unafraid to honor. The woman's eyes widened, her breath caught, and her trembling hands rose to her lips. "Why?" she whispered, though no one answered. The chief reached into the leather strap across his chest and drew out a single white feather, its quill wrapped with beadwork. He placed it into her palm, closing her fingers gently around it, as if entrusting her with something heavier than gold. The crowd erupted again, outrage spilling like fire. "It's a claim! He shames us all." The sheriff shoved through the mob, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver, his face pale beneath the brim of his hat. "What's the meaning of this?" he barked, voice straining against the hush that clung to the warriors. The woman stared at the feather trembling in her hand, her tears spilling unchecked as the weight of 200 bowed heads pressed against her heart. And in that moment, though the crowd howled of shame, she felt, for the first time in her life, what it meant to be honored. The silence cracked into fury, voices rising like a storm against the kneeling warriors. Women clutched their children to their skirts as if respect itself were a disease, while men spat into the dirt, their pride wounded more than their tongues could bear. "Stand them up," someone shouted. "This is blasphemy," another hissed. "She isn't worth the dust under their boots." The sheriff raised his hand, trying to corral the noise, his jaw tight with unease. His eyes flicked to the feather in the woman's trembling hand, then to the Apache chief still bowed before her, unmoving as stone. "This can't stand," the sheriff barked. "No Indian makes claim to a woman here. You've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed." The rival farmer, broad-shouldered and red-faced, shoved forward, his fists curled. "She'll ruin the town's name if you let this stand. Cast her out. Let her follow them if she wants to be shamed." The crowd roared in agreement, each shout stoking another, until the square throbbed with anger. The woman clutched the feather tight against her chest, her knuckles white, her breath short and shallow. She felt every eye sear her skin, branding her as something she could not name. Elias Redfeather. One feather may seem light, yet in the right hand it tips the scales of a whole town's conscience. To mock it is easy, to face what it reveals is harder still. She turned toward her sister at the edge of the crowd, searching for even a flicker of kinship, But her sister's gaze was cold, her lips curved in a bitter sneer. "You shame us all," she spat. "You think a bowed head and a feather make you more than what you are? You are nothing, and now you drag us with you into disgrace." The words cut deeper than the crowd's jeers, slicing into old wounds that had never fully healed. Her breath broke into sobs, but the Apache chief rose at last, his eyes steady as he faced the mob. "She is honored," he said, his voice deep as distant thunder, "and no tongue can unmake what has been done." The rival farmer snarled, pointing a finger at her. "Then let her go with you. We'll not have her here." The sheriff's hand hovered near his revolver again, his face pale, uncertain whether to defend her or cast her out. The woman's knees weakened beneath the weight of 100 condemning voices, and still she clutched the feather, its quill pressing hard against her chest, as though it alone kept her standing. And in that fragile moment, she knew she had been marked forever. Though she did not yet know if it was salvation or ruin. The crowd's fury pressed close, their jeers rising and falling like a tide determined to sweep her away. She turned again toward the familiar faces at the edge of the square, hoping, praying for one hand to reach out in mercy. Her father's shoulders were stiff, his jaw set in iron, and when her eyes met his, he looked away as if she were a stranger. Her sister stepped forward instead, veil shimmering in the light, her beauty sharpened by disdain. "Do you hear them?" she hissed, her voice carrying on the air. "You've brought shame on us all. No dowry could wash this away, no marriage could mend it. You've always envied me. And now you've proved it, marked yourself with their feather like some savage bride." The words struck like blows. The woman staggered, her chest tight, tears flooding her eyes as the feather in her hand trembled. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered, her voice broken. "I didn't—" "Liar," her sister spat, her lips curling. "You wanted their eyes on you. You wanted to steal what was mine. But you are not wanted here, and you never will be." Elias Redfeather. Betrayal from blood cuts deeper than a stranger's knife, for it tells the heart it was never safe, even in its own home. The rival farmer laughed harshly, circling like a wolf that had scented weakness. "There it is. Even her kin cast her aside. She doesn't belong with us, and she doesn't belong with them. She's nothing, less than nothing." The sheriff lifted his hand, his voice hard. "Enough. Take her out of this square. Before dawn she'll be judged properly." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd, a grim satisfaction in the sound. Fear clawed at her throat, and with a desperate cry she pushed past the ring of onlookers, clutching the feather to her chest as though it could shield her from their hatred. Stones followed her, striking the boards and clattering against walls, some sharp enough to cut her arm as she stumbled down an alley. "Run, shameful one," someone shouted. "Hide your face." She pressed on blindly, the alley twisting into shadows, her sobs catching in her throat. Behind her, footsteps echoed, laughter, cruel and heavy. She glanced back to see two men peeling from the crowd, their grins wide, their intent clear in the darkness. Panic surged, her breath ragged, but before she could flee, a shadow moved at the alley's mouth. The Apache chief stood there, broad and immovable, his gaze steady as he barred the men's path. For a moment, silence gripped the alley, broken only by the rasp of the woman's sobs as she clutched the feather tight, realizing that even as her family cast her aside, he had not turned away. The two men froze at the alley's mouth, their smirks faltering when they met the Apache's gaze. He said nothing, only stood there as if carved from stone, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his knife, his presence more threat than any weapon could make. One of the men spat into the dirt, masking fear with bravado. "Take her, then. She's yours now. No white man will touch her again." Their laughter cracked hollow in the shadows before they turned and slunk back toward the square. The woman sagged against the wall, clutching the feather to her chest, her sobs quiet but raw. The Apache chief extended his hand, not forcing, not demanding, only offering. Trembling, she placed her hand in his, and he pulled her gently forward. Together they slipped into the night, leaving the jeers behind. Elias Redfeather. Sometimes rescue is not thunder nor steel, but a quiet hand leading away from ruin. They rode out of town before dawn, the sky paling into gray as the first stars faded. Her body ached from fear and flight, her eyes swollen from weeping, but the chief's steady pace on the trail pulled her forward. The land opened wide around them, cliffs rising on either side as they entered a narrow canyon. Its walls glowed faintly with the morning light, a corridor carved by time itself, echoing with silence that felt both sheltering and sacred. He dismounted and led her deeper on foot, guiding her toward a hidden hollow beneath an overhang. "Here," he said simply, gesturing for her to rest. She sank to the ground, her dress torn, her hands shaking as she pressed the feather to her lips. "Why?" she whispered, voice hoarse. "Why do you stand for me when even my own father will not?" He crouched before her, his eyes steady, his words deliberate. They mock what they fear. They fear respect. One day they will see it. She bowed her head, unable to hold his gaze, the feather quivering in her grasp. But before the fragile stillness could settle, the sound of hooves echoed faintly through the canyon. She stiffened, panic clutching her chest. The Apache turned sharply, his eyes narrowing as the glow of torches flickered against the canyon walls. Riders had followed, men who carried more hatred than mercy. Their voices bounced across the stone. "Find her! Bring her out! She won't hide among them savages!" The woman gasped, pressing her back against the rock, the feather slipping from her hands onto the dust. The Apache chief's expression did not change, but his hand gripped the hilt of his knife. His body coiled with readiness as shadows moved closer. And in that moment, the canyon itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see whether honor or hate would claim her life. The torches glowed brighter against the canyon walls as the riders closed in, their laughter echoing like wolves circling prey. The woman pressed herself deeper into the rock hollow, clutching the feather she had scooped from the dirt, her heart pounding so hard she feared it would give her away. The Apache stepped forward, his frame outlined by the flames, his shadow stretching long against the stone. He made no move to hide, no attempt to soften his presence. He wanted them to see him. The sheriff's voice rang sharp above the others. "You can't keep her. She's town business, and she'll be judged at dawn. If you stand in the way, you'll answer for it." The rival farmer rode closer, torchlight carving his sneer into a mask of hate. "She's cursed, and she'll drag your whole people into shame. Step aside, chief, or we'll burn her out and you with her." The woman's breath caught, terror closing her throat, but she clutched the feather tighter, its quill digging into her palm until blood welled. Elias Redfeather. The frontier had its laws, but they were not written in books. They were carved in choices made beneath firelight, when courage was measured against fear. The Apache chief raised his chin, his voice steady and low. "She is honored. She will not stand trial for the crime of being seen." Murmurs rippled among the riders, unease cracking their bravado. But the sheriff drew his pistol, its steel glinting. "You've chosen wrong. At dawn, she stands before us all. That's the law." The rival farmer smirked, his voice dripping venom. "Or we take her now, drag her back, and let the town spit on her one last time." The woman gasped, clutching the feather so tightly her blood smeared across the barbs, crimson staining the white. Her sob tore through the canyon, a sound that froze the riders for a heartbeat. The Apache stepped closer to her, his body shielding hers from their eyes. "If you come," he said, his voice like stone breaking, "then you come through me first." Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of torches. The sheriff's pistol wavered, his eyes flicking between the chief's calm defiance and the unease in his own men's faces. Finally, he lowered it, spitting into the dust. "At dawn," he growled, "we'll settle this before the whole town." He turned his horse sharply, and the riders pulled back, their torches retreating into the canyon's mouth. The woman sagged in relief, but her hands shook, the feather still warm with her blood. And though the mob was gone, their promise of judgment hung heavy. Darker than the night itself, the first light of dawn spilled pale across the canyon as the Apache guided her back toward town, his silence steady, his stride unbroken. The woman clutched the feather, its barbs stiff with her dried blood, and every step closer to the square twisted her stomach tighter. She thought of the sheriff's promise, of the jeering crowd, of her sister's sneer that still rang in her ears. Desperation gnawed at her, whispering that perhaps one place might still grant mercy. As they reached the town's edge, the church bells tolled hollow, their call pulling her like a tether. She broke from the Apache's side and hurried to the church doors, her voice cracking as she pushed them open. Inside, the air was cool and dim, the altar draped in white cloth, candles flickering weakly against the stone. She stumbled forward, dropping to her knees before the priest. "Please," she begged, thrusting the feather out like an offering. "They say I am cursed, that I am shamed, but this was given in honor. You know me. You christened me. Please, tell them I am not nothing." The priest's eyes flicked to the feather, then away, his mouth tightening into a hard line. "Child," he said coldly, "you have brought this upon yourself. No blessing can sanctify heathen tokens. You must repent and renounce what was placed in your hand." Her tears blurred her vision. "Renounce it? It is all I have left." "Then you have nothing," he cut sharply. He reached forward, snatched the feather, and threw it across the floor where it skittered into shadow. His voice rang harder, echoing against the stone. "Go. Do not bring your shame beneath this roof again." Elias Redfeather. Many think God's house is built of stone, but I have seen hearts more merciful in the wilderness than in walls where judgment echoes louder than prayer. The woman gasped as the heavy doors slammed behind her, the sound like a coffin sealing. She stood in the morning chill, her body trembling, her eyes burning with betrayal deeper than the crowd's jeers. For if even the church cast her out, then truly she was nothing. She swayed on her feet, her breath breaking into sobs, but a shadow moved at her side. The Apache stooped, lifting the feather from where it had fallen outside the door, brushing the dust from its barbs. He pressed it back into her palm, with quiet reverence, his voice low. "Their walls cannot name your worth. Hold fast." Her fingers closed around it, her tears wetting the quill once more, and when her knees buckled, it was his arm that caught her before she fell into the dust. The Apache led her away from the church and across the open prairie until the roofs of town were only specks against the horizon. The land opened wide, dotted with sage and cottonwood, and soon the smoke of campfires curled into view. Her steps faltered as they neared the Lakota encampment, fear prickling through her exhaustion. "They'll see me as an intruder," she whispered, clutching the feather as if it were her only shield. The chief shook his head slowly, his voice calm. "They will see you as one who has been honored." His assurance carried her forward until the camp unfolded around them. Rows of teepees painted with symbols, children darting between fires, women grinding corn, men tending horses. At once, the bustle quieted, all eyes turning toward the woman in her torn dress and tear-streaked face. She bowed her head, shame burning hotter than the sun. But the chief raised his hand, and silence deepened. An elder woman with silver woven through her braids stepped forward, her gaze steady and kind. She took the younger woman's hands gently, her fingers brushing the feather, and said in accented but clear words, "This is not shame. This is respect. You carry it now." The girl's throat tightened, her eyes flooding. "But they call me cursed. They say I am nothing." The elder smiled faintly, her palm pressing over the girl's trembling fingers. "They mock because they do not understand. Here you are not cursed. Here you are seen." Elias Redfeather. Among the Apache, a gift wasn't given lightly. To wear a feather was to carry story, to walk with honor stitched into one's very being. The women of the camp moved closer, circling her with gentle hands. One combed her tangled hair, another brought water to wash the dust from her face, and the elder herself braided the feather into her dark strands. "Now the story is woven with you," she whispered. For the first time since the jeers began, the woman lifted her chin, catching her reflection in a polished bowl of water. She did not see the plain, unwanted sister mocked by the town. She saw a face framed with dignity, her hair adorned with a symbol that shone brighter than jewels. Her breath hitched as a tear fell, not of despair, but of something deeper, hope. But as the women hummed a low chant and draped beads across her shoulders, the peace fractured. A shadow slipped from the camp's edge, a man crouched low with eyes full of hate. She glimpsed him vanish into the tall grass, riding hard toward town. The feather trembled in her hair, and her stomach clenched. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Betrayal was already on its way back. The camp grew restless as dusk painted the prairie in red and gold. Men returned from the hunt with wary eyes, their horses stamping nervously, for word had already begun to spread. Riders from town were gathering. The woman sat near the fire, her hair newly braided with the feather, beads resting against her shoulders. She touched them lightly, as if afraid they might vanish with the next breath. The elder woman placed a warm bowl of stew in her hands and whispered, "Eat, child. Strength will be needed." But before she could lift a spoon, the warning cry went up. "Riders!" The ground trembled beneath hooves, and the horizon flickered with the glow of torches. The townsmen swept into view, the sheriff at their head, the rival farmer beside him, his sneer lit by fire. Behind them, the crowd stretched long, men eager to see her dragged back in disgrace. The woman froze, the bowl slipping from her grasp, stew spilling into the dust. The Apache chief rose, stepping forward with calm purpose, his warriors falling silently into line behind him. 200 strong, they stood like stone, their eyes fixed on the intruders. The sheriff raised his voice, harsh and commanding. "We've come for her. She belongs to the town, and she'll stand trial tonight. Hand her over, or we'll take her." Murmurs rippled through the warriors, but they did not move, their silence heavy as a drawn bow. The rival farmer leaned from his saddle, his voice dripping poison. "She was nothing before this farce, and she'll be nothing after. You can dress her in feathers and beads, but she'll always be plain, always worthless." The woman's chest heaved, shame clawing at her throat, but the feather in her hair stirred with the evening breeze, steadying her. Elias Redfeather. Fear of respect is sharper than any blade, for it forces men to face what their cruelty cannot bury. The chief lifted his hand slowly, palm open, and spoke. "She is honored. She has been seen. Your trial is not law. It is cruelty." His words rolled across the camp, and for a moment even the flames seemed to flicker in doubt. But the sheriff's face hardened. He raised his rifle, its barrel glinting in the firelight. "Enough talk. Step aside or blood will settle this." The woman's breath caught, her heart pounding as the torches closed in, their flames reflected in 100 watchful eyes. And in that tense silence, she understood. The moment of judgment had come, and her fate balanced on the edge of a trigger. The torchlight pressed closer, a red tide threatening to drown the camp in fire. The sheriff's rifle stayed fixed on the Apache chief, but his hand trembled, the weight of 200 silent warriors bending the air around him. The rival farmer sneered, spurring his horse forward so its hooves churned the dust inches from the woman's skirts. "Look at her," he barked. "A plain face dressed in feathers, and you would make her a queen. She's a disgrace, and you're fools for bowing to her." His laughter broke sharp against the night, but it faltered when the chief stepped forward, slow and deliberate. He bowed again, lowering his head before her, his braids brushing the earth. A ripple passed through the camp, and one by one the warriors followed, 200 strong, kneeling in silence, their dark eyes lifted not to the sheriff nor the farmer, but to her. The woman's knees shook, her breath stuttered, and her hand flew to the feather woven in her hair. It trembled there, glowing faintly in the firelight, the weight of it suddenly vast. Elias Redfeather. I have seen battles turned not by blade nor bullet, but by silence too heavy for cruelty to carry. That night, silence bent the town's fury until their rage quivered under its own weakness. The rival farmer's face flushed scarlet. "This is madness," he roared. "She means nothing. She is nothing." His voice cracked, desperation leaking through his anger, and for the first time his words sounded hollow, even to his own men. The sheriff shifted uneasily in his saddle, sweat glistening beneath his hat. His rifle sagged, lowering inch by inch, until it pointed at the dirt instead of the chief's heart. The woman swallowed hard, her body trembling as she stepped forward into the circle of firelight. Every eye turned to her, the plain sister who had been mocked and cast aside, now standing alone in the hush of warriors. She raised her hand slowly, the feather glinting between her fingers, and her voice rose, thin but steady. "I may not be beautiful to you, I may not have dowry or name, but I am not nothing." Her words carried across the silence, simple and unadorned, yet they struck deeper than any insult. The crowd shifted, shame creeping across faces that had once jeered her. The rival farmer snarled, but his men would not meet his eyes. For the first time, the power was no longer his. And in that breathless square of fire and shadow, the woman realized she had become more than the mockery they had thrown upon her. She had become a symbol too heavy for their hatred to move. The rival farmer sat rigid in his saddle, his fury burning like a torch sputtering against the wind, but the sight before him left him powerless. 200 warriors knelt in unbroken silence, their heads bowed, their strength made greater in stillness than any weapon could measure. At their center stood the woman, trembling yet unbent, the feather glinting faintly in her hair. The sheriff lowered his rifle fully now, his eyes darting between the bowed line of warriors and the woman who, only a day ago, had been called worthless. His jaw clenched, but no order came. The law itself faltered beneath the weight of what he witnessed. The rival farmer shouted, his voice ragged, "She is nothing, you cannot—" But the words broke off when his own horse sidestepped nervously, shying from the steady gaze of the Apache chief. His men, one by one, dropped their eyes, no longer eager for the fight they had come to see. Elias Redfeather. The frontier had little patience for sermons, yet sometimes the land itself preached through silence, and all a man could do was bow his head to it. The woman took a step forward, her breath catching in her throat, but her voice clear. "All my life you told me I was less, that I was plain, unwanted, nothing. But tonight I have been seen. Not as shadow, not as shame, as worthy." She lifted the feather high, its barbs catching the torchlight, a symbol brighter than jewels. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, one of the townsmen muttered, "Enough, let it be." Another turned his horse away. The crowd, fractured by unease, began to scatter, their torches flickering out as they slunk back into the night. The sheriff lingered longest, his face carved from stone, but in the end he too wheeled his horse, retreating in silence. Only the rival farmer remained, shaking with rage until finally he spat into the dust and fled, alone in his shame. Slowly, the Apache warriors rose, their silence broken by the soft rustle of movement. The chief stepped to the woman's side, his presence steady, his eyes never leaving hers. He said nothing, for nothing more was needed. She pressed the feather close to her heart, tears streaming freely now, not of shame but of release. And though the night was quiet, it felt as if the whole world had bent low before her. Elias Redfeather. And so it was that one bowed head became 200, and a woman once mocked as nothing carried honor heavier than any crown. I am Elias Redfeather, and I tell it as it was. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind. If you had stood in that square, would you have joined the jeers, or bowed your head in silence with the Apache? Tell us in the comments.